Well, many of you I have met previously, and it's a pleasure to see you again. And those that I'm meeting for the first time, welcome. The way I'd like to start us off this evening is to um, maybe close our eyes and breathe together. And with each inhalation, take in courage and strength, and with each exhalation, whatever might limit you from having strength or courage, releasing that. So again, here we are breathing in strength and courage, breathing out any limitations. So we'll just continue that breathing for just a little bit. But what I do is give you some of my observations. There's all these concepts related to grief, and we'll talk about some of those. But one observation that I'd like to start off with is this. When one is grieving, when one is in the throes of grief, the importance is to stay present to what that is, however you might do that. And that means for me that you take breaks. You give yourself some spaces where you take time away from it, and then you come back to it. And each person will do that in their own way. So find it for yourself how that works. But the way through grief is to feel it, is to be with it. So I say being present to your grief is what allows you to do the work. And grieving is really about honoring the loved one. And when we're honoring our loved one, what will come up is gratitude. Right? Gratitude for their life and the meaning in your life. And when we have gratitude, what wakes up is the love and compassion that's inside of us. And that's quite beautiful, isn't it, to discover what that is. So that's one part of grief. Another observation I've made is this, that every life matters, every story matters. All of us belong, and so your story must be in the world. So if you're experiencing loss and in this place of grief, your story really does matter, and we want to know that story. So find friends, find community, find family members that can hear your story, or all hospices around the country have these bereavement groups, as our hospice does. So there's other places like that you can find a place to tell your story. And what the wisdom is that the depth of our sorrow really has something to do with the depth of our love. So when you are in deep sorrow, what that's really saying is that you have a great deal of love for that person, that you're remembering, that you're honoring. In the telling of your story, my observation is that clarity comes. In other words, when you're present to that story, you awaken with greater awareness of the beauty of the person, the loved one that's passed, the gifts, the talents, And the difficulties, too, that will be there as well. The imperfections, the flaws. The importance of remembering is this, that these loved ones become our ancestors. They have been teachers for us. And so we know that it's really important to honor our ancestors. Our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. Yes, that relative. But then I think of it's not just biologically related people in our life that are ancestors, but all these dear people that have been in our life become our ancestors, and to hold space for them. A book that I am finding quite valuable for me, and I keep picking it up and looking at it and reading more of it. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, written by a man named Francis Wheeler, Weller. He happens to live in Forestville, so he's in Sonoma County, and I've sat with him at a retreat that he put together some years ago. This is his latest book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and then the subtitle, Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief. If you're interested in going deep in understanding what grief's about, this guy has really worked it. So I want to recommend that book, and also suggest that he talks about 5 gates of grief. It's interesting, and I'm just going to mention them, not that I have all the knowledge to fully break that down, what those gates are, but gate 1, everything we love, we will lose. Think about that. Everything we love, we will lose. That's just the way it's put together. Gate 2, the places in ourselves that have not known love. That's grief too. The places in ourselves that have not known love. Where we've been shamed, perhaps. And maybe at this point in our life we've worked that through and no longer feel that. But it's possible that that may come up when you're grieving, that there's something in you that's yet not healed. Gate 3, the sorrows of the world, and he names these things. Species, loss of species, habitats, cultures, homelessness, as a sorrow in the world, homelessness, commercialism, consumerism. And then gate 4, what we expected and did not receive. It's interesting, isn't it, to think about that. It's like when we're children and we're in the world, and it's all cozy, or maybe not, we have needs. We have need for love. We have need for touch and companionship. It's very possible that those needs did not fully get met. So that's gate 4. Then gate 5 is ancestral grief. And what Weller describes here is grief we carry of those who came before us. And my parents lived the Depression, and I heard about that, and it was grief that they were working, right? And in some ways, I think it's still with me, that sorrow that they had related to that. Slavery. loss of the old ways. Those kinds of losses are in our consciousness in some place, in our psychic, if you will. So, when we are grieving, we discover the love that we have inside of us for those we care about. We come to know more about our capacity for kindness and compassion. Now that's a pretty good thing, isn't it? So if we kind of want to push grief away because it's painful in so many ways, right? It has this agony with it and sorrow that's hard. But if you look at grief from this perspective, that it's helping you know more about love, know more about having compassion. And what more beautiful thing for the world to have more of that, right? Naomi Nye, a poet who wrote a poem called Kindness, and this is just one line from her poem. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. And when we are grieving, we come to know more about struggle, fear, uncertainty, despair, depression. You can all shake your heads and, yeah, I know that. The darkness, if you will. So we have the light with the love and compassion that we're discovering, but there's also this other counterpoint of the dark, the shadow, what's hidden. Lynn Andrews, an author of the Medicine Woman series, says this: grief deepens you. Through grief, you can explore every aspect of your dark side. The anger, pain, abandonment, terror, loneliness. Grief forces you to look at those parts of yourself that are not yet healed. If you can look at grief as a teaching, you will grow. The seeds of wisdom are planted within the wound of grief. I mentioned it a little bit ago, how important it is to have community, have friends, have loved ones, family members who get it, right? And hopefully you have someone that gets it, that's in your life, because that's telling your story and over again helps you move through, not keeping it inside, but being able to express it. And there's words, of course, and that's kind of my focus, is how the expression through words, tears, as we sit together. But there's art, there's music, there's different ways of expressing our sorrow. So make those available to you. So I have a sign-up sheet here for anyone who's interested in a bereavement group. In Willits, we have a plan now to start one. I think it's going to be January 26th. It's a Thursday. That'll be the first time that group will meet. It'll meet for 8 weeks. And it's going to be in the mornings from 10 to 12. So if you put your name down and a phone number, I'll be in touch with you to confirm that. So this story of loss, what are the components of the story? There are different authors that talk about that. And it's what happened, who you were before the loss, before the death, as you remember. Talking about the meaning of this loved one in your life. What meaning do they have to your own life? And if you have a brother or sister and it's a parent that you're mourning, each person in the family, each sister or brother, might hold that a little bit differently, the meaning of a relationship. So you want to pay attention to what's your part in that, how that is for you. Learning to do and telling our stories, learning to tell our stories is a practice that takes time, requires a capacity to reflect where the mind is engaged, and allows the questions. Here is a point I want to make. The goal in remembering is not to feel guilty, be frightened, scared, or angry. However, if these feelings are there, they're sure to come up. And that's good. But that's not necessarily where you start. Now, I want to tell this story about my loss because I have all this anger. You may discover the anger that's underneath as you tell the story. Clarissa Pinkola Estes says this: when a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that's not what great ships are built for. So she uses the metaphor that we as a human are a great ship. So I interpret from this that perhaps when we're grieving or we're going through difficulties in our lives, maybe being in harbor is a good thing, being moored. So giving yourself that opportunity to get off that great sea of life in some form, so you have some time, some space to be with all of what's coming up for you. A little bit about the philosophy of hospice. I work for a hospice, and this particular hospice I've worked for 15 years, and I've worked for a couple others before that. Hospice offers comfort care rather than curative treatment. And to be on hospice, there needs to be a referral with a patient having 6 months or less to live. Hospice treats the person, not the disease. Hospice considers the entire family, not just the patient. And hospice supports self-determination, that is, where the patient and family have something to say about how this is going to work for them. So the grief process has a beginning, and then a middle, and then I am coming up with some different ways of thinking about, rather than ending or closure, what would be another way to say it? Because when we're grieving, yes, we grow and we change and we get to a new place, but in some ways that grief is with us all our lives in some way. Yeah. So I say beginning, middle, moving towards resolution, towards integration, towards renewal. And if that's the feel that you're... Integration is an interesting word. What it might mean if we're a person grieving is that loss of the loved one is integrated into your life, in the story of your life, and it's a piece of that's part of your story. It's not your whole story, but it's part of your story. And so it's integrated in with all these other pieces of your life. And that takes time. It does take time. So the process of grief has phases and qualities. In the beginning, they talk about being numbed, in shock, not being able to really find your mind to wrap around it. And what I've learned is that the numbing is a good thing. Because if you had to somehow take in all of what's going on in that moment, it'd be overwhelming. So the numbing sort of allows you to step aside and not have to feel it all. So as one feels safe and feels the strength, awareness increases. And the accompanying of this is, you get what the process seems to be is that after the acceptance and the being present to that sorrow, there's the deep anguish and deeper sorrow part of what it feels. Your mind, body, spirit is able to take it in more clearly, what it is that what the loss is, and then go deep into that anguish and agony of that. So you could think of grief as a straight line. You know, you're here, and then you're here, and then you're here, and then you're done. That was the early way of thinking about the grief process, is that it was a straight line. It was linear. Now it's more a circle or a spiral. That's the diagram, the image that is being talked about. So what goes on is that when you're in that place of sorrow, there's the remembering, and there's maybe, for example, driving by the cemetery where the loved one is interred may bring up feelings, and tears happen. It's like you're back, that recycling that happens. I have made 4 handouts, and they're on this front table. They are these common grief responses, and that is, there's 6 areas that are identified. There's the physical response, our bodies, maybe we're fatigued, we're grieving, we lose our appetite, or maybe increased appetite at the other side of that. So there's the physical symptoms, then there's social symptoms, and what I keep hearing is how, for most people, they kind of want to pull back, withdraw from socializing. And that would be me too. I'd be like that. Because I need to go inside and listen to what's going on with me. And being present with others and whatever's with them would distract. But there are people who are more extroverted, and how they process is with another person. So it may vary from one person to another what that looks like. So there's physical, social, mental. Mental might be that you're confused, that you can't remember something. Simple things you just don't come to you. And then there's the emotional, all these array of feelings that could happen when you're grieving. And I wanted to say a few things here about anticipatory grief that takes place before the loved one passes. And that would be where the diagnosis is made, and the physician is telling you that you only may have so much time to live. But now you imagine that you're going to die, or the loved ones of that person are imagining that, and they're getting ready. So there's that anticipatory grief. It begins before the losses actually happen. Then there's grief that's timely, grief that would be right on time, I guess. It's like, then there's delayed grief. And I lived through the years of the AIDS epidemic, and so many of my friends died. And There were places that we could go to get support, but I was a person who was just so overwhelmed with that I couldn't go to these gatherings of these support people because I would miss the persons who died so much. That's how I experienced it. So that's about delaying. When you have multiple deaths, many losses, you may delay one grief that's piled on top of another. Complicated grief. Complicated grief is grief where the loss is sudden and unexpected. I think Lynn is an example of that, and that's why it's so impacting our community, is that there's no preparation, and it's hard to hold it, hard to grasp it, that person no longer is here. Suicide, homicide, violent deaths. I'm going to read a poem. I'm going to read the whole poem. I've been reading excerpts from others, but now I'm going to read this poem of Mary Oliver, The Summer Day. And she asks lots of questions in this poem. And my thinking is that these are really the questions that we ask when we're in grief. It's called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who's eating sugar out of my hand, who's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last, and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And I'm thinking, if it's somewhat down the line in our life, 50, 60 years of age, perhaps, the question is, what have I done with my life, right? I gave this poem to my niece when she was 18 years old. And of course, that really applies. What will you do with that one wild and precious life? But it's always there to find again, I think. There's always life to examine. What is it now? So those questions that she's asking show up when we're grieving, when we're dealing with a loss, or when there's major changes in our life. Who's in charge? Who can I depend upon? How to be with silence. What is my relationship to the grasshopper or other creatures? How do I do that? Do I do that? Ray Rashhara, she's the founder of a retreat center on the Big Island, and she says this: there is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which comes the unshatterable. There is a hollow space, too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss. Too vast for words, a hollow space, out of whose darkness, out of the darkness, we're sanctioned. What does that mean, sanctioned? sanctioned into being, made sacred, perhaps, acknowledged, valued, that's probably a good word. So, it's interesting when you think what this grief is about is you being sanctioned, or me being sanctioned, valued. Permission. Yeah. Yeah. Rumi is one of my favorite authors, or poets, and he has a poem called The Guest House, and it's about all these feelings that come and happen for us. And he suggests there's a new feeling every morning, but it's not every morning. In my mind, it's all day long there's new feelings coming. And he says, welcome them all. They're unexpected guests. Welcome them all. Entertain them. Treat each guest honorably. Invite them in. Be grateful. Be grateful. Each has been sent as a guide from beyond. They are here to clear you out for some new delight. Imagine that. Meet them at the door, laughing, whoever comes. I think that's what we, as community, as families, loved ones, friends, we want to create that feeling that we welcome one another and whatever might be there for them. And that Rumi's poem gets at that, I think, for me. We're going to take a little break here. Well, not a break. A break from my speaking. We're going to open it up for questions and comments or thoughts. And after a few minutes of that, I have another reading to do, and then we're going to light this candle. And I'll let you know what we're going to do with that candle when we get there. So I brought this candle along, which is an angel, and was thinking that when you have a question, you would hold this, and the angel would be with you with your question. So, who would like to start us off?
I didn't hear the whole of the Rumi poem, but I've read enough Rumi to think that maybe what he means there, and see if you agree, welcome every emotion as it comes. Welcome every stage of grief as it comes.
Exactly. I read it that way too. Yeah. Thank you.
There's got to be some learning from every different thing that happens. You know, John,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's good.
Jonathan Livingston Seagull says, if you're still here, you've got something to learn. And this last lesson, I hope it's my last painful one, of grief. There's something to be learned from it.
I'll respond to that with this thought. I met with the abbot of the Buddhist monastery on Tomkai Road, maybe a couple months ago now. There's 3 or 4 of us, and we're there for the purpose to talk about the End of Life Option Act, which is now in California where a person could choose that. And what was wonderful and surprising in a way, the abbot said, well, if you're in robes, you couldn't do that. You'd have to, the teaching in his way of thinking is that, just as you were saying, there's lessons yet to uncover and to live and move through life all the way through to the end allows those lessons to be learned. Now that doesn't mean that applies for everybody, but It might. It's up to you.
You mentioned earlier that there were stages.
Yeah.
It's not a straight line.
Right.
And for me, my husband and I had a daughter who died of brain cancer 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it took forever, but then on the other hand, it was like when I learned to live with it. I learned to live with the fact that she's gone. She was here. And so now I'm hoping that happens. My husband. It's only been a year and a half.
Yeah. So you learned a lesson with your daughter, and maybe that same lesson or some variation of that will come to you now. And you're opening to that.
But not, it just started, I feel like.
Yeah. Is everyone able to hear? No. Thank
We
you.
were married 65 years. And this is my daughter. And the hospice nurse.
Yeah. Linda and our colleagues. Oh, pardon me. So I'm going to read this last poem, and then we're going to light this candle. I'll introduce what I'm going to read by saying that a couple months ago, maybe not even that long, 5 weeks ago, I was thinking about this, being here, and what to share. And I thought of Leonard Cohen and words from Anthem. And so I went on the internet and I found it there, and I played it over and over and over and over. And it really, went deep inside me. So it was such a strong feeling with me that I thought, well, I guess that means I need to read this. So here it is. Leonard Cohen's Anthem. And it's not the full, all the words, but most of them. The birds they sang at the break of day, I heard them say, don't dwell on what has passed away or what is yet to be. Ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. You are enough just as you are. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Ring the bells that still can ring. Every heart to love will come, but like a refugee. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything, in each of us. That's how the light gets in. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. So I'm going to light this candle and invite you to shout out the name or names, multiple names, of loved ones you want to remember here. And I'll call out Joey, a colleague I spoke to today. I said, I'm going to be at this happening tonight. Is there a loved one's name that I could speak? Joey. So here, whatever the name may be. And multiple names if you have several people you want to remember. Michael.
Laura.
Laura.
David.
Janet. Yeah.
Lynn,
Ruben. Lynn.
Katie,
Chuck, Susan,
David. Lynn. Kenny.
Shannon.
Kate?
John, James,
Name.
Bill.
Joseph,
Dick. Saul.
John,
Dennis.
And the name's not spoken. Maybe they're here too.
On Sunday at the hub, the new hub, the old Willits Environmental Center building, 4 groups are going to now share that. And there was a coming together in 4 groups, and there was some music offered, and one of them was a trio singing a Bob Dylan song, because he just got the Pulitzer Prize for literature, or the Nobel
Bob
Peace
Dylan.
Prize, was it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
And the song they sang was, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right.
Yeah.
And the verse that got me, just got me. And my husband passed away 5 months ago now. And it says, ain't no use in calling out my name, babe, because I can't hear you anymore.
Yes.
Does hospice offer any one-on-one counseling?
Oh, yes, I did mention that. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
One-on-one counseling, family counseling.
And a particular, like 3 sessions or 5 sessions, or is there a number, or?
We used to have numbers, but I passed that up.
Oh, good.
So we just
Okay.
do what's needed. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay. The question is, repeat the information regarding the bereavement group that's starting in January. It's Thursday. It's going to be on Thursdays for 8 weeks. And the first session is January 26th. And it'll be from 10 to 12 noon. And it'll meet at our office, which is 100 Sanhedrin Circle. From the hospital, it's the next major building east of there, on the same side of the street. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you all.